That is our acronym, because as you know, each state agency has an acronym, and ours is OHE. On behalf of Commissioner Olson and the entire senior leadership team, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. I want to also take this time to acknowledge our public engagement team, who continues to work diligently to ensure that these calls happen. This is OHE's first public engagement event of 2021, and I'm happy to announce that we will continue these events throughout the year because we understand how critical it is to stay connected with the community and to hold space for dialogue, which we're all experiencing and are impacted by in some way. So it is our mission to engage with diverse communities to identify barriers in post-secondary education. We will work in collaboration with communities to provide equitable access to information and advice that leads to pursuit of post-secondary education and/or training for all Minnesotans. So our topic today is the impact of housing and food insecurity on students. And I just want to applaud the Public Engagement Committee for bringing this topic to the forefront. With everything else that's happening around our world, oftentimes we get caught up and lose sight on some of the critical things and challenges and barriers occurring right here in our own state, and which have been ongoing issues for years. So again, thank you, Public Engagement Committee, for bringing this to the forefront. Today we have convened an expert panel of higher education advocates, students, and stakeholders to discuss the barriers faced by students who identify with experiencing housing and food insecurity in post-secondary education. The panel will also discuss the resources available to assist students at colleges, county, and state levels. So I want to extend our great gratitude to all the panelists for taking time out of your busy day to be with us and to share your expertise and personal experience on this critical topic. Our moderator today will be our very own Lane DeSalvo. Lane is the administrator for the Competitive Grants Department at the Office of Higher Education, and she's also a great colleague, and we're so lucky to have her part of the team. And with that, Lane, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Lane DeSalvo. I'm the Competitive Grants Administrator for the Office of Higher Education. We have a co-host who is also going to help facilitate this call. Priscilla, please feel free to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your organization.
Hi everyone, my name is Priscilla. I'm currently a student at about 4 institutions, but my main institutions are North Hennepin and Bemidji State University. I'm pursuing my degree in accounting. I also serve as the president for LeadMN. And LeadMN is a college association for two-year colleges. So we represent all students that attend two-year colleges, whether it's community college or technical college. And housing and food insecurity is a big thing on our agenda. We've been fighting especially for food insecurity for years now. We're able to pass the Hunger Free Act in the legislature back in 2019. We're hoping to get some funding for that moving forward. Housing insecurity is something that we're starting to delve into because well, our students have been talking about it, and because we think it's just the morally right thing to do to ensure that our students are not homeless and getting their education at the pace that they want. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So me and Priscilla are going to go through and ask questions one by one to our panelists, but first I want to introduce them. So we have an expert group with us today. We have Dr. Susi Keefe. She's the Associate Professor of Sociology and Director of the Center for Justice and Law at Hamline University. Hello, Susi. We also have Katie Desantis. Hennepin County Office to End Homelessness is her workplace. And hello, Katie. We also have Bernier-Garagiola Bernier. She is a student at the Humphrey School of Public Policy. Parisa Rouzegar, a student at Hamline University. Natalie Jacobson, the campus kitchen program coordinator at Augsburg University. And Fartoon Mohammed, who is a student and member of LeadMN. So welcome, everybody. Before we get going with these questions, I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes setting the context for the call. I manage a program called the Emergency Assistance for Post-Secondary Students Grant Program, which provides funds to colleges for them to re-grant to students who are in a financial crisis to help them pay for their rent, groceries, gas, or bills. There are several of these programs that are state funded around the country now, but Minnesota was one of the first. We were actually the second. So that's something that we're really proud of here at the office. Aside from that, we also have basically some facts and data that have been collected over the past couple of years that I'd like to share with you that helps kind of set the scene. So in 2017 and 2018, over nearly 700 students received over 1,000 individual grants from the Emergency Assistance Program. And if we had more money to give out, that number would have increased drastically. So we know that there is an issue. On a more higher, bigger picture perspective, in 2017, there was a study out of our office that identified nearly 1 in 10 households are considered food insecure in Minnesota. And that was in 2017. So imagine that number after COVID and the impact of COVID on food and housing insecurity. In 2019, the Hope Lab released a report based on findings at 8 colleges and universities in Minnesota. 52% of the respondents of that survey, who were all college students, said they experienced housing insecurity in the past year. 18% said that they experienced homelessness. 62% of survey respondents said they experienced either food or housing insecurity within the last year. So we know that this is an issue that affects many college students and families in general in Minnesota. And like I mentioned before, that was in 2019. So imagine 2020 and what those numbers look like now. So with that, panelists, feel free to jump in popcorn style if you have a response you'd like to share for any of the questions I'm about to ask. We'll start off with a general kind of question for everybody. Why are students experiencing housing and food insecurity? From your perspective.
I'll jump in first. This is Susi Keefe, professor of public health and sociology at Hamline. I think it's really important to set the context for sort of the national and state and sort of local trends for college in general, right? We were seeing major shifts in the demographics for who's attending college. And we often frame those as issues of retention and enrollment. And as we have more and more students from first generation, Pell eligible, and low income backgrounds, we see that college age poverty is getting worse. And I think what we're seeing right now is sort of an awareness of this increase and a desire to do something about it, but I'm not sure higher ed often has the capacity or the tools to do so. I often get asked, Hamline is a private liberal arts college, and so people assume a lot about what it means to be a student at a private liberal arts college, and I'm really happy that Hamline alum Anne is here today to talk about her work and also Parisa. But this, at Hamline at least, this work has been absolutely student-led, and it began with the work of Anne and her student colleagues in 2017. But we see that as we provide more resources around basic needs, that we can make a difference with this. But it really we have to acknowledge and address that student basic need insecurity is an issue, and it's an issue at all institutions, not just public institutions, which is where most of the conversation is centered, which I don't disagree with that. But for example, at Hamline, we see that, Pell eligible first generation and students of color, our numbers have increased to nearly 50% of our undergraduate student demographics. So it's a real concern, and their food and housing insecurity doesn't exist in a bubble, right? It exists in an intersectional way with all of their identities and experiences, and so it's one of the things that we keep trying to push in the conversation. So I'll stop there and let others hop in, but I think we have to sort of recognize that it's a very complex issue that is deeply connected to poverty.
Yeah, thanks, Susie. This is Anne Bernier. I am a Master's of Public Policy student now at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. But I started my college trajectory a little bit different. So as a Native student, I came a non-traditional route, as a lot of Native students do. We're more likely to be non-traditional students and to be student parents. So as I began community college, me and my partner actually both began at the same time, shortly after the Great Recession. We were experiencing like pretty poverty. We had 3 kids to take care of. We were also caregivers to my disabled father-in-law at the time. And I think that a lot of times colleges and other institutions aren't taking into account that students are caregivers, right? And now more than ever post-COVID, right? So many students are ending up being caregivers. So as Susie said, in 2017, I had just transferred to Hamline from Century, and at Century led efforts to create the Resource and Support Center. And so coming to Hamline, I kind of thought that didn't happen at private institutions. So I was really surprised to see high levels of food insecurity and to hear my peers talking consistently about being hungry. So if we really want to delve deep into the roots of this, like Susie said, this falls along the lines of race, of gender, of sexuality. So Black, Indigenous, and students of color consistently lack equitable and reliable access to basic needs while attending college. Our research through Feed Your Brain at Hamline found that transgender and genderqueer students are also more likely to have food insecurity than cisgender students. So we really need to be intentional about centering marginalized students in all of our analyses and viewing our policies through the lens of, at this point, I would like to say trauma-informed, because so much poverty, racism, right? We can wrap that up in trauma, but also in this post-COVID environment, so many more of our students are going through trauma. So if we really look through those lenses, we can see that poverty, sexism, transphobia, and racism add layers of complexity to students' food insecurity experiences.
Hi, everyone. This is Katie Desantis. As Lane said, I do work for the Office to End Homelessness with Hennepin County, but I was also a homeless and highly mobile student myself. I was homeless throughout my middle school, elementary school, and college experience. I'm a first-generation college student, and now I am a first-generation master's student at the Humphrey School of Public Policy. So I'm getting my master's in public affairs. So, and I also went to a private liberal arts college. So this was a big thing because I graduated at the height of the Great Recession, and I was working to send money home to my family. Conversely, like Anne, I was a caregiver in a way. I didn't have children myself, but I was sending money home to my mother and siblings. And so I think, not only caregiver status, but I also think mental health needs to, we need to talk about mental health too, because there's so much stigma that surrounds not only homelessness, but food insecurity as well, and not being able to eat. Luckily, you know, at Gustavus, it's kind of a bubble. And so I had scholarships to feed me while I was there. But when I came back to Minneapolis, it was a completely different situation. And so, you know, and the stigma that surrounds that. I'm going to school with kids who can pay, whose families can pay the $40,000 a year tuition with one check. And, you know, the idea of telling those folks that, no, I can't go out this weekend because I can't afford it and I have to work. So, you know, that mental health comes into it too. And I think a lot of the things for me was that I internalized a lot of that stigma against homeless individuals and against homeless kids specifically. And so you grow into adulthood with that. So I'm going to be talking from my personal and professional kind of views. So I apologize that I'll be switching hat, but yeah, like I think we need to really talk about mental health because, as Anne mentioned, this is all trauma, you know, and all of this trauma is affecting brain chemistry and is affecting how people are, how we see the world.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those answers. We welcome all the perspectives you have. Priscilla, would you like to ask the next question? Oh, I think you're muted, Priscilla.
Okay, sorry. So for the second question, from you all's perspectives, what are the barriers that students experience or go through when they encounter food insecurity and housing insecurity?
I think that there are first of all, my name is Parisa, she, her pronouns. I'm the student from Hamline University. But I think that a huge barrier for students experiencing food and housing insecurity is that over the years, the cost of living and the cost of attending school and tuition has continued to increase at a very rapid level. With that being said, minimum wage has not been able to adequately address the increase in this financial and economic need. In addition to that, I think that a lot of students do not have the proper skills or ability to access financial literacy or financial information, and a lot of them aren't even aware of the programs and the resources that are available to them. So I think that there is a very complex issue, and poverty and marginalization is just one of the many.
Anybody else want to take a stab at that question?
I can just quickly go. Hi, good morning. My name is Gia Mikuls. These she, her pronouns. I am a research analyst here at the Office of Higher Education. So much what we hear from institutions is that not only do students not know where to go, institutions actually don't know where to go. Institutions at a systems level do not know where to go in their community. They do not know if it's the county. They do not know if it's the state. Campus staff, like individuals, get those 30-minute phone calls where you stay on hold and then you give up because it's too confusing and you don't have 30 minutes. So actually that's on us. That is on us as state agencies, as local nonprofits, as community colleges, as private universities. That's on us. To talk to each other and figure out actually how to connect the dots, because if we can't do that, we surely are not going to be able to tell students where to go and who to email, because we are all going to get stuck in someone's inbox and just never get to the SNAP application and I won't even go into the SNAP application or applying for things and all of the navigation that requires. And we have navigation, but no one knows how to get it. So we have to navigate to the navigation. but we will get stuck in email inboxes. So we as state agencies have to do a better job of getting all of our ducks in a row and clearly communicating those things.
I'd love to follow. Oh, go ahead, Natalie.
Oh, go ahead, Susie. Okay, I'll go. I'll just jump in a little bit just so I work at Augsburg University and coordinate a program called Campus Kitchen. So we do work around food insecurity in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood, so the neighborhood that Augsburg is located in, and then also on our own campus. And I think one of the issues just that I see on our campus as far as food insecurity goes is just stigma in general, which I know some folks have already alluded to. So just even thinking about like the placement of our food shelf on campus and how that's shifted over the years. So our campus cupboard food shelf was started by students in 2013. And from 2013 to 2018, our campus cupboard food shelf was essentially tucked away in a closet in an extremely inaccessible location. And the reason that it was put there initially was because the students that started the food shelf knew there's a lot of stigma around this, want students to feel like, you know, other people. Oops, sorry, I muted myself. That was part of the rationale around putting it there in the first place. But something that I've noticed is a shift in you know, students and the campus community as a whole wants to destigmatize, especially as they're changing demographics on our college campuses, as Susie was talking about. There are a ton of students who want and need to access these resources. And so we've seen, even just in moving our food shelf to a more centrally located, accessible location, more students are coming in, seeing one another moving through the space. And obviously this has shifted a bit during COVID in the way that we're doing things. But so I think just what individual colleges can do to help reduce stigma around accessing something like a food shelf, even with something that seems as simple as changing a location to a tucked away closet to a more central piece of campus.
I just wanted to follow up on what Gio was saying. This is Susie from Hamline. I just wanted what Gio was saying about SNAP. And you know, if you go to the USDA SNAP website right now, there's a specific frequently asked question about, are students eligible? And it says most students are not eligible there, when in fact we know that nearly or more than 50% of college students are eligible, but less than 3% access the resource. So I don't disagree with you that we could be doing a better job of being clear about that. It's a major barrier that on the front page of the USDA SNAP benefits page that it says college students aren't eligible. I bring this up because I'm part of a community of practice with Campus Compact, where folks from all around the region who've been doing this work of campus food pantries for 20+ years are in conversation. And I know Rebecca Layton is on this call, but she's been such an amazing mentor to Hamline in helping us to build up a SNAP referral program by sharing their process at the U, and our partnership with Second Harvest Heartland and the Department of Human Services. And so with our Vista, Sophia Brown, who I think is also on this call, we just since December have implemented our own SNAP referral program, live with it less than 2 weeks ago, and we've already had 100 students go through the process and be eligible. And so now they're working with Second Harvest Heartland. They have SNAP outreach social workers who are helping students to navigate that process. I do think that even the paperwork, all of it is so students don't have that. So I wanted to mention that as an example. It took us more than 2 years. I mean, when Anne was a student at Hamline, she was advocating for a SNAP program at our institution. And it's so hard. I think there's so much resistance often, sort of like, how much is this going to cost us? Who's going to run it? How is it going to work? What are the details? Now I have to become an expert in SNAP. And so this is, I think, an example, at least from my perspective, for how an institution like Hamline can partner with external organizations that do have that capacity and do have that expertise. It's costing us nothing to, it took some time from a couple of us to get this going, and we were really grateful for the expertise of other folks and sharing their resources. But I do think there's more we can be doing. And this is, I'll just one more thing, and I think Parisa and Anne can speak to this too, but in our ongoing qualitative and quantitative research with students on our campus, we learn that students don't expect our institution to fix their poverty, right? They understand that this is not a problem that was created by our institution. They do, however, desire that we acknowledge the circumstances in which they navigate college and that we help them with resources, particularly resources that aren't necessarily even funded by the institution, right? So to me, this is, it's been many years in the making to get to a SNAP referral program. And the fact that we just got to it in the last couple of weeks is, it feels miraculous on the one hand, and also every campus should have a SNAP referral program, right? Like this, why is this something that we resist or don't know about? We can all do better with that. Okay, I'm gonna stop now.
Is there anyone else that wants to take a stab at that question?
Sorry to interrupt whoever that was. I'm Farsi Mohammed. I'm at Northland Community and Technical College in East Grand Forks. I'm probably further north than all of you. So to further Natalie's point from earlier, the stigma around getting help with food insecurity is definitely a big issue, especially on our campus. We did have the idea to have a food shelf, and when we were going to implement it, we were going to put it in the student senate office, which is just a closet in the back of the school. Eventually we did get these baskets that we put in the library. We have it near the front desk. We have a few in the nursing areas and stuff where there used to be fruit, but now because of COVID, there's only dry food like granola bars and such, which is still really good. I go and fill them sometimes, and people do take them, but not as often as we'd like. We definitely have more inventory than people take. We need to work on making it more known that there is some help that the college can do. Maybe not everything. We can't solve every problem, of course, but it's very important that the students know that there is a way that they can get help with their food and their house. And like you said, Professor Susi, that with the SNAP benefits, with figuring out how to register for that, to figure out how to get the necessary paperwork for all that, because applying for SNAP is definitely complicated. So it's good to have the resources to figure that out, if that makes sense.
I see Katie, you wanted to say something?
I was pretty much going to say the same thing as Fartune, so thank you.
Thank you for that. I did want to share a few things that I've heard regarding housing insecurity as well as food insecurity from students that I work with. On the subject of housing, food insecurity and the barriers that folks face, there's one that I've heard very commonly amongst international students as well as ethnic students, where access to food pantry is there, but access to the type of food they eat is not there. So usually they would go to the food pantry and they want to get food from there, but it's like canned beans and tuna, and that's very American, and it's not something that they can really use or that really appeals to their taste. So while we can say, well, the food is there, we're working on providing the food, it's not always as diverse and accessible for various folks. And even also looking at, when we talk about accessibility, also I've heard about how you give me canned food but no can opener, right? How do you know that I have a can opener? If I'm homeless, I don't carry around a can opener, right? If I'm homeless, I don't have all those things to use to eat the food that is available at the food pantry. So this is some of the barriers that I've heard from folks that say, yes, you can say the resources there, but is it really there if it's not available to me? And another thing that I've heard regarding housing insecurity in terms of barriers, especially for my side of things in dealing with two-year colleges, a lot of our colleges, if not almost all of them, probably say 3 or 4, but most of them are commuter colleges. Students go to college and come back home. And what that means for a lot of students is they're working full-time or schooling full-time, I should say, working part-time, don't have the wage to back up don't have the money to pay for regular rent in a city that they're living in. So compared to someone who's working 40 hours a week at a job that's able to provide, at least manageably provide them their rent money. And so what happens is they're having to compete with the resources that the rest of the population, is competing with, but they don't have the same resources as most of the population because they're students. And so there's not enough student housing, there's not enough affordable student housing. And even when there's student housing, it's predatory student housing. Same with everything. People just are very interested in gaming students and taking advantage of them. And it's unfortunate, but yeah, just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I really want to echo everything that was said by Parisa and Priscilla and Gia and Katie and Fartoon actually on this. So in our research at Hamline, we did find that there was definitely a lack of culturally appropriate foods. And so to think about this critically on a broader social level, we need to stop necessarily thinking about food insecurity and start seeing our food system apartheid. So we need access to healthy and culturally appropriate foods that are grown in sustainable and ethical methods. And too often these foods are only available to an elite few and not the people who would typically eat it as part of their diet, whether that's around cultural practices or around health needs. And then just, I think that we might be letting institutions off a little bit, so I just want to get a little bit critical on the institutions. And I think that Priscilla hit the nail on the head with this, right? So take U of M, for example, with these predatory housing practices. So much money is being spent on luxury housing and building new luxury apartment complexes and relatively little on affordable student housing. And I absolutely believe that it's up to institutional leadership to set the tone of urgency to address these issues. And first and foremost, how they can do that is by setting costs of living that are geographically appropriate. So too often, students are not able to adjust their cost of attendance to prevent issues of food and housing insecurity because those levels are preset and predetermined. And there's not enough options to do appeals on that.
And I was just going to add to, sorry, this is Katie from the Office to End Homelessness. I was going to add to that many shelters, so if we have students that are staying in emergency shelters, many of the shelters that are here in Minneapolis or Hennepin County don't allow perishable foods. So you're going to have foods that have a lot of preservatives so they can stay longer. Can't have fresh fruits in there just because of rodent issues and whatnot. And so we run into that, right? You're going to eat a lot of microwavable stuff, a lot of easy to go stuff that may not be the healthiest thing in the world, just because of where you're staying, and you might only have access to a microwave. And so that's a big issue. And then I was going to comment on housing prices, because as Anne and Priscilla alluded to, like, our housing market in Hennepin County is skyrocketing, and it's just going to keep getting more expensive. We're on par with Seattle right now to go really expensive. A one bedroom in Minneapolis is averaging about $1,100 right now, and I don't know about you, but I can't even afford that. And so so students obviously are not going to be able to afford that while still maintaining a life and health and safety. So that's a big thing too, is that we need more more of that equitable housing, not only for students, but obviously I work, within the family system. And so, we need more affordable housing everywhere, but for students, definitely. And we do have some federal laws that for youth housing, so youth homelessness is ages 16 to 24, so that does encompass folks that are in higher education. And we do have certain federal laws that if you want to get into youth specific homeless designated housing, you can't be a full-time student. And there's certain caveats. It's a lot of in the weeds that I don't want to go into right now, but I'm happy to talk about later. But that's the thing too, is that like, are we going to ask somebody to decrease their education in order to get housing when that education might get them out of poverty? So it's kind of this rock and a hard place, and it's perpetuating this cycle of poverty.
Yeah, and I was going to add to further On's points, like having a geographical, if we had like a geographical pricing on the housing market for where people who go to college usually live near the college, so having the prices stay at a set price would be more beneficial. But unfortunately, that's just not how it works. I live, like I said, in northern Minnesota, so I feel like where I live, it's kind of, the population is way less than Minneapolis. I used to live in Minneapolis, and there's way less people here. There's way less help here. So, and there's a lot of people who they don't speak English, they don't, or they don't have the right education to understand higher level paperwork, if that makes sense. So, and then of course there's the fact where recently, during the pandemic, I might add, rent has gone up in our apartment complex that I'm living in right now and the surrounding areas, which is near the college. I think almost $70 or so has gone up. And that's really putting us in like that danger zone where there's 3 of us in my family that go to college. And although I'm almost graduated, thank God, the other 2 are not anywhere near graduating. So there's that issue of will we be okay? Will I be able to find a job after May quick enough? Will I be able to finish taking my boards exam and pass the first time? Like there's all those things that are on my mind as well. Not to mention the boards exam for nursing, because I'm a nursing student, is a huge chunk of change by itself. I took my PN boards exam, my practical nursing boards exam, right before this whole pandemic started. And I couldn't have taken it at a worse time, because if I knew there was a pandemic coming, I definitely would not have spent that $400 or $500 on that exam at that moment. I would have reserved it for fixing the car, which broke down later. I would have reserved it for the food that we were going to buy, the tons of food we were going to buy, where groceries are also going up in price too. And there's a lot of other things too that I would have probably saved the money for, but that's just, we can't see the future. So that's just how it is. So things have been kind of difficult around here. And like I said, being up in the northern part of Minnesota, where it's a little bit less people, more people need help, but less help is available. So that's something that I think we should address. And I think Nikkei also put a question in the chat. She said, or he said, do you feel or believe that these insecurities are a result of more systemic issues? And I definitely do believe that, because the majority of the people that live in this apartment complex, which happens to be the cheapest one in the whole area within, I think, 100 miles, there's a lot of people who are immigrants. Specifically, they're Somali immigrants from Somalia. And they don't have the language proficiency, and they don't have the educational standard to get higher paying jobs. So that's not only an issue of, systemic racism, but also, the education that they can't get because they can't afford it. So there's a lot of that in there that's affecting them, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Fartun. I feel like not a lot of folks are aware of how much those exams cost. It is not, a casual thing to do. So Definitely thank you for setting the stage and also for speaking up for Northern Minnesota. I feel like a lot of times when we have these discussions, there's an assumption that it's all metro area, when really a majority of poverty is it's spread across the state. You know, it's not condensed to one region. So appreciate that. Before we move on with questions, I just want to make the audience aware that we will have a Q&A at the end of this. So start thinking of questions, or if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, which is being monitored by staff, so that at the end of this, we can get your questions answered, or if you have a personal experience with any of these issues, would love to hear those as well. So this is something we touched on a little bit in the last conversation, and it's kind of a funny question, but what makes institutional change difficult? I think it's the reason why I say it's funny is because institutions of higher ed are not known for their speed at change, but as you can tell, as Dr. Keefe mentioned, like change is happening just at a little bit of a slower rate. So why do you think it's so difficult for change to happen at the institutional level?
I can start this one off too. I'll say I really remember the moment when Anne came to me in my office in 2017, really frustrated after having sort of pounded the pavement around campus trying to get people to listen. She and her student colleagues put together a food access survey and implemented it with no support from the institution at all, and discovered that a really high percentage of our students were experiencing food insecurity, and despite that, just sort of like inertia, and we made a decision to collaborate and to advocate around this. But on the one hand, it's taken us 4 years to get where we are, but in that 4 years, with the student leadership, we've accomplished a tremendous amount. So it does feel, I appreciate sort of the chuckle around institutions are sort of glacial paced. And I'm not sure that I can really say why in general, but I feel like around food and housing insecurity, I mean, we all know about the jokes about the ramen diet. We, that we romanticize student hunger, that we expect it. It's a badge of honor. It's, it's a hazing of types, right? That we expect that, and that we tolerate it, and that we don't criticize it or condemn it, right? I think it's part of the story of student food insecurity that our culture, right, our higher education culture does romanticize it and expect it, and also that the way these institutions are designed, that we are not responsible for it, right? That we're always, and I think this is where maybe it was Gia, where you were sort of saying, we get stuck in these loops of, in an inbox or a voicemail or on hold. And I actually, Parisa, I'm going to reference the conversation with you. I can remember in the fall talking with you about students getting bounced around, like, oh, that's not my job. You got to go to this office. You got to go to this person. And nobody really knows the answer, that we're siloed in our responsibilities. And I think one of the reasons why my partnership with the student organization Feed Your Brain and this work on campus is that I've been really willing to step outside of my lane and sort of say, that's not my job, but I want to do it. I can't know this information and sit on it. It doesn't make my life always very easy, but as someone who grew up on public assistance with an immigrant mother who was not a citizen, people don't see that on my skin, and I think, like Katie, we have to tell our story and share our identity and our experiences. And so for me, that has been a really big part of why I've been called into that work, having experienced those things as well. And I think we need to do more of that. I think at Hamline, for example, many of the faculty are first, but it's not something that is sort of known, right? And that is part of it. I think if we could rally around that, we can see more institutional shift, but I don't have the answers, but I do see that it is sort of piecemeal like this. So I would love to hear from some of the students about their perspective on the glacial pace.
Hi, this is Anne. I just, again, want to be a little bit critical and push back on this because I think institutions tend to move at a slower pace. And I think if we really look into those policies and practices, there is a systemic supremacism at the root of preventing that shift. And I want to just point out that in the wake of COVID, institutions moved real quick to create change. And that shows that we can, when we put our priorities together and collaborate. Like Susie said several times, Hamline's not doing any of this alone, right? This is what in the policy world we refer to as a wicked problem, right? This idea of food insecurity is too big for any one organization to solve. So it's going to take a network of collaboration and to really support students and to create a safety net for students. Because at the end of the day, students are here to learn, and this constant search for basic needs is really taking away their cognitive ability to learn, which is what we're here for. And if we're not supporting students so that they can get to that graduation point, so they can get a certificate or a degree or some type of training, at the end of the day, what are we here for?
You know, I just want to build off of what Susie and Anne were saying, just in terms of the institutions that we have in place aren't necessarily set up to support students in the way they need them to. The policies in place are not adequately addressing their needs. And as we have said before, no one really wants to take responsibility for that, which obviously causes a really huge problem. And especially for students who are in this marginalized position, they don't have the agency or the control over the institutions to make that change themselves. And I think that something that schools have and institutions have really failed to do in general is they have failed to engage students in the conversation and really make their experiences the center of everything. Because through the interdisciplinary collaborative research that I did with Susie in my senior seminar, we found that students, when they're having these conversations about how, you know, they're having this issue with food or housing insecurity, they also come up with solutions. They also come up with ways that they can help or ways that have benefited them. And I think that the failure to recognize that these students have a lot of value to bring to this issue is a real shame.
I wanted to, this is Katie. I wanted to build off of what Anne, Parisa, and Susie have talked about, and that we look at folks that are experiencing poverty and that are experiencing food insecurity or homelessness in a very deficit-based model, right? And we need to realize that these folks have been able to get their needs met to get to college, and so not only are they inventive, but you know, they're creative as well. And there's so many personal attributes outside of the classroom that can help in solving these problems. And as Anne so deftly pointed out, like, we moved fast in COVID. Hennepin County did the same thing. And so now we're pressing them to do more because it's like, yeah, it clearly can be done in a fast and intentional manner. And I think a big thing is we're not set up to service kids and adults that are food insecure and experiencing housing crises. And that old saying, out of sight, out of mind, is so true in the American psyche. Is, you know, if I don't see it, it's not a problem. And so many people operate under that, but it's not true, you know, and So I always go back to that out of sight, out of mind thing. So let's put it in their sight then.
Anybody else before I ask a different question? Okay, so the other questions, and we also touched on this a little bit as well in conversations, but what are some of the impacts of COVID on food and housing insecurities? And we know there is a lot of impact, but I'd like for y'all to speak to some of the specific impacts.
Something that I've noticed a lot, this is Natalie from Augsburg from the Campus Kitchen program. Something I've noticed a lot in the students that we're interacting with through our campus food shelf is that a lot more students now are, and some of these students were doing this before too, but there's an increase of students having a responsibility to take care of family members because a lot of students have parents or siblings or other caregivers who have lost their jobs. And so there's a lot of increased pressure on students to not only take care of themselves and get their own needs met, but take care of their broader family networks. And obviously that has been true before COVID too, but I've just noticed in my own work that that's definitely been really pronounced. Yeah, there's just a huge amount of responsibility and stress on students to take care of their families. And so something I've noticed in our food shelf context is there are a lot of students who are asking for extra resources to bring home to families of 10 or 7 and to share those resources. And I think we've had sort of an approach of like anyone who comes to us, we're just kind of going to give them sort of, everyone kind of gets the same service, but then that doesn't really account for all these differences. And there are some students who are just feeding themselves. There are other students that are feeding giant families. So that's just something that I've noticed in my work.
To further your point, Natalie, yeah, there's a lot of people that I know who live around me that do have many kids. But fortunately, my family doesn't have any kids, but we do have the unfortunate reality of having lost the jobs during COVID. My mom specifically is the one that lost her job. I didn't have a job during that COVID time, which I kind of regret, but thinking back on it, maybe I would have lost my job because of COVID. But anyway, so she lost her job and she did register for unemployment. And that's another thing to bring back what I think it was Jaya that said before, that the whole paperwork thing. Registering for unemployment is very complicated. So she has a lot of difficulty with that. Still to this day, she's having a lot of difficulty with that. So that's a big issue. Also, like I said before, my brother and my stepdad are both in college with me at the same time. So that's 3 tuitions that we have to pay for. And he goes to the University of North Dakota, which is more spendy, more pricey than Northland. My brother and I go to Northland, which is relatively cheaper, but it's still, there's 2 of us that go, so it's a lot of money. So that's kind of something to think about for us up here.
Just to kind of build off of that, I think that COVID has definitely exacerbated absolutely everything. If you look at the positions that students are working, they're generally going to be working in these lower income minimum wage service jobs. So for example, for me, I have been, a waitress for most of my life, and I lost my job due to the pandemic. And applying for unemployment is such a tedious process, and it's also not equitably accessible. First of all, the unemployment website is only accessible during certain hours of the week. So for people who may be busy during those hours, it really leaves them at a disadvantage. And we also have to consider just the ability to have access to technology and the internet. That has also been an incredibly big issue. I think another issue with COVID is that a lot of college students were not eligible for the stimulus payments that a lot of Americans received because a lot of college students were claimed as dependents, even though that most of them live independently for a majority of the year. When also looking at COVID and specifically in food and housing insecurity, unemployment obviously and lack of financial security obviously adds into that, but also the entire atmosphere of the college experience has also changed. The people no longer feel safe in like the housing that they are in because they are afraid of the risks of contracting COVID-19. And even with trying to get to the food center or hang out with friends or even just do anything that makes students feel like they belong and have a sense of security in their life and in their basic needs, they do no longer have that access anymore. And so this situation that COVID-19 has caused has not only exacerbated everything that was there, it's also added new problems. And I think that if we don't address it, and specifically addressing the basic needs that have come with it, that this problem is only going to get worse.
This is Katie. I 100% agree with everything Parisa said. So thank you for that. I would also add that so what we've seen in the Office to End Homelessness and specifically in the coordinated entry system, which is the route into homeless designated housing in Hennepin County specifically, is that we've seen family homelessness go down a lot, families that are literally homeless. And so that's parents with any minor children or youth with minor children. However, we've seen youth and single homelessness skyrocket and completely bulge. And so we've seen a lot more youth agencies step up in opening shelters, in paying for hotels, in opening drop-in centers and food shelves for the youth that are experiencing homelessness. And when I say youth, I mean 16 to 24 years old. And so, we have that. So there has been some progress in that. We've seen different agencies kind of step up and use these CARES Act dollars to fund things that'll help the community. But we are still seeing so many youth that are unsheltered or in emergency shelters as well. And so, we have college students that are studying in encampments where they probably don't have access to Wi-Fi, or in emergency shelters where they probably don't want to turn their video on so that others can see where they are. And then you have to add in the fact that they're studying to try to get a degree and trying to concentrate when they're also concentrating on where am I going to lay my head tonight or tomorrow night, where is my next meal coming from. And so that all of that trauma combined, that's a lot for anyone to handle.
I wanted to share, we do, ever since Anne started in 2017 with our first food access survey, we do a food access survey every spring, and we include housing and security questions as well. And this past spring, we added a whole section to our survey on the impact of COVID-19 on students' experiences. And I just wanted to share a couple of things, none of which are really surprising, but I do think being able to sort of point to our research does help sort of verify it, right? And sort of bringing those the stories and the personal experiences together with that. So on our campus during COVID-19 last spring, 1 in 6 students had increased food insecurity on our campus. So we're really seeing that the baseline is pretty high food insecurity and it's getting worse. And then, and this is something we haven't talked about today much, but the students who are needing culturally appropriate foods that are not being provided already, students with food restrictions and food sensitivity, being the right food. And this is for students who live on campus, right? And so we've seen the way in which food provision for students who have meal plans, students who have a meal plan shouldn't be food insecure, right? And this is something that we see at the national level too, that that students with culturally appropriate needs and sensitivities and restrictions experience food insecurity while on a meal plan, and that COVID-19 has really exacerbated that. 5 times greater is not a small thing. And then the other thing I wanted to point out was our research all along has demonstrated that marginalized students students with marginalized identities are much more likely to be much more food insecure. And we're just seeing it across the board in our findings. So I just want to sort of share that and we see that research happening at the national level really mirrors that. And so I want to sort of get back to the point Anne and I made at the very beginning is that we really have to center these students' experiences and partner with them. And I think, you know, Parisa did a nice job of mentioning that too, that students have solutions and they have ideas and they know what the barriers are, right? As soon as you ask a student about barriers, there's a flood of things, and addressing those things doesn't always have to be a major shift or a major expense, right? It's often about transparency and communication and openness, right? And not gatekeeping around resources that are available or yeah. I'm gonna stop there.
I just want to quickly add something again, not a panelist, but I deal with this a lot as well. But one thing, and I will say this to the day I die, like faculty, staff, institutions should not be controlling how students react to things or how like their lives. Like it's not the job of the institution to train people to be good individuals. And I see that a lot happen in our institutions where a student is homeless, right? But already on your syllabus, you're saying only if you're dead or dying should you ask for permission to retake this test. Like, what does that even mean? In a country where healthcare is not like a right, like it's a privilege, you're asking me to present a doctor's note to show you that my life is difficult right now, so that I can get an extension on an exam that you're not even grading. The computer grades that automatically, you know? And so I've always brought this up and people look at me and say, oh, you're probably just a lazy student. It's like, I don't care. Like for me personally, as an individual, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna bulldoze my way through. But what of people who don't have that opportunity? And, you know, Katie, you were talking about like homeless students who are trying to study. I had an instructor that was like, you have to put on your camera for our Zoom classes. And in my head, I'm thinking, first of all, I don't want to do it, so I'm not going to do it. But like thinking about a student who is homeless and not wanting to show that condition, like we don't lead from a place of empathy, right? We don't lead from a place of this could be happening. A bad situation could be happening. We come from they're not a good student and we need to train them to be better. It's not your responsibility. You're not their parents. Like just don't. And I've seen that so much, and it's something that I'm so passionate about, and like it infuriates me a lot because professors, faculty members think it's their duty to punish students or to show them, you know, I got to show that I'm serious. I got to show them that, you know, my class is great and rigorous, and I have to do that by making all these punitive measures. And what happens, it then impacts students of color. It then impacts people with marginalized identities, because if I have a white instructor, I don't have that confidence a white person has to approach that white instructor right away. A white person can be like, I'm going to go talk to this person because I don't care what you have to say. And that comes from privilege and just knowing as a white person, you've got it. But if I'm an immigrant student coming from a society that has power distance, I'm going to see my professors as an authority and be like, it would be dumb for me to confront this person or to ask questions or to reach out for help because they're a person in authority and I shouldn't be doing that, you know? And so I've seen that a lot, and it's just so many facets. And like I said, I will say this to the day I die, like institutions, faculty members, if y'all are listening, just be nicer. It starts from your syllabus, like and I said it like, if there's certain words in the syllabus that would turn away many students from approaching you. And you might be like, well, I'm nice. It's like, okay, but not really. You don't sound nice from all the ways they're able to, you know, reach out to you and access you. And I'm going to get off my soapbox now, but that's just something that just annoys me. And yes, the impact of COVID on housing and food insecurity has been exacerbated for everybody. Like it's worse for everybody because it's a systemic issue. But then colleges are like adding to that burden by just being that like stick in someone's neck. Just, I'm already dealing with all this stuff. My life is already hard. I don't need you as my professor to make it harder. Just open that test for me. Just give me an extension. It's not going to kill you to give me that extension. It's not going to make you look like a bad teacher. Like it doesn't do anything. Just open it. You're not grading it. You're not in charge of that. I don't know. Anyway, like I said, off my soapbox, but
Priscilla, can I hop on your soapbox real quick for a second? So this is Katie again. I think adding on to that, like in American society, and this is a very privileged view, but we look at folks that like all of a sudden you turn 18 and you should know everything. You should be responsible and you should be stable and you should know how to do everything. And it's like, that doesn't magically happen on your 18th birthday. That doesn't magically happen on your 21st birthday. And so like, it's so much of this, as Anne mentioned in the chat, this individualism of like, oh, well, you know, I know how to do it. Why don't you know how to do it? And, you know, that's adding on to the stressors that these students already have in their lives and that are being exacerbated by COVID as well. Thanks, Priscilla, for that soapbox. Appreciate you.
I also just kind of want to continue that narrative as well, in the sense that, so as a triple major in public health, sociology, and women and gender studies, I have been able to learn a lot just about marginalization and oppression, social stigma and norms. And I think that this is also a time to be really, really critical of the norms that we have in place that make students feel ashamed and bad if they need help. There's a huge stigma in our society that expects everyone to know how to handle every situation perfectly. And as Katie was saying before, no one knows how to be an adult at 18 years old. When I enter, even today, so many students do not have the skills that they need to be an adult, in the sense of, I don't know how to do my taxes. I don't know where the resources are that I can ask for help. And that is the same case for so many other students. And it only gets worse when you look at these marginalized identities who are already facing all of this oppression. And I think we just really need to kind of switch the narrative from, instead of being like, you did something wrong and this is your fault, to it doesn't need to be that hard, because it really doesn't. And I don't think that we need the pressure that we have.
Thank you all for sharing such powerful perspectives on this. I really appreciate the soapbox. It definitely, not only is it telling truth to power, but it's also just, I mean, speaking of your experience is really powerful for everyone around you who may not understand what it's like or have to manage those types of issues. So I think it's really enlightening and good for everyone to know that experience. I have one more question that we have planned, but then there are several questions from the chat and Q&A portion that we'll get to as well. I want to make sure that we are somewhat on time. So I'll just start off with the last question, which is, what are some strategies you use as a student to stay safe and sheltered? And what could institutions do to assist students in this area? So when we talk about safety, we could be talking about health, mental health, physical safety, anything like that. Would just love to hear your perspectives on that. If no one feels compelled, we can move on to the Q&A. I realize that's a difficult question to answer.
I could speak to it from our research that we've done, if that's a intro.
Oh yeah, that would be great.
But yeah, I mean, well, I think Anne can too, less from sort of a personal perspective, but more from sort of the research that we've gathered and sort of ongoing. But I think students are involved in a lot of really creative solutions, right? And the coping mechanisms, thank you, Anne, that they are using are many, and it often relies on their network and beyond the institution. But I will also say that, you know, we have to, I think limiting it to housing and food is often sort of part of the problem, because we can think about their utilities. There's, you know, I think Fartun suggested, you know, when a car breaks down, then you can't get to your job, you can't get to campus. I mean, there's just sort of this cascade effect that when one ball that's being juggled drops, it impacts everything else. So I'm gonna maybe pass the baton to Anne and see if she wants to add more from the work we've done.
Yeah, thanks, Susie. Yeah, so we definitely see there's a lot of coping mechanisms that aren't necessarily ranging from dependency on toxic relationships that are necessary for students to access basic needs, to sleeping in unsafe spaces, selling plasma and other blood products, and even trading sex for money, all of which put students in risk positions. I think that we've touched on, you know, a lot of what can institutions do, you know, but when we really get down to it, you know, this is about healthy relationships, and we often talk to students about the need to have healthy relationships. And as somebody who was raised in a home that was not a very healthy relationship, I left school, right? I left school in high school. I dropped out at 16. And we were homeless for a while, until my mom was able to get back on her feet after you know, leaving such a bad relationship. So if we think about things like that, in light of COVID, how many students are now stuck in these dangerous places that other people may view as safe, right? Oh, you're with family, that's safe. Oh, you're staying with friends, that's safe. It might not necessarily be. So just having that awareness, I think, is really key.
This is Parisa again, and I just want to continue what Anne was saying. So for the student research that I did last semester with my senior seminar class, the group that I was in, we focused on community and belonging. And within that context, we found so much information about how important community and belonging and having those healthy relationships really are to securing and feeling secure in your food and housing. Throughout our research, we found that every other basic need that we were researching was connected to how students feel in their community and if they feel like they belong. And I feel like that is a very important issue that we need to focus on. I think that we need to find better ways to amplify the organizations that are on campus. I think that we need to increase collaboration between administrators and students and organizations as well, just to really get that sense of community so that we can have this space to have this conversation. If we're not able to really talk to each other about the issues that are going on, we're never really going to be able to fix them. And so I think it's really important just to focus on all of that, especially now when so many people are feeling isolated and unsupported.
Absolutely.
You know, sorry.
Go ahead. No, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, this kind of brings it back full circle to Katie's point about needing to really add conversations about mental health into discussions of food and housing insecurity.
So I'll just go ahead and ask the first Q&A question, and then maybe me and Priscilla will kind of take turns asking these. But the first question I see asks if there are any student-led advocacy housing rights groups or organizations, or other types of groups meeting around this issue regularly?
For housing specifically?
That wasn't the question, but if there's any type of like basic needs, I think would be relevant.
Yeah, I mean, at Hamline, we have Feed Your Brain, which Anne started in 2018 with other students, and it continues on today. And so that's been an incredibly important part of our process, because we're just in constant partnership and communication. And you know, I think one of the most important things they did on our campus was honestly bring this issue to light, but also they successfully advocated with our student congress to fund our food pantry. So our food pantry is entirely, well, I should say mostly funded by student activity fees that the student congress has appropriated for that purpose. So those partnerships are so vital to, I think, what's happening at our institution. But we don't have anything specifically happening that I'm aware of around housing insecurity, but we are moving to our model with our food pantry to be more around basic needs than just around food access, because as I learned from Anne when she was teaching me all about this in our first year working together, this is, you know, food access is just the beginning or the tip of the iceberg, and really being able to address this in a holistic way is
I haven't heard of any student-led groups right now, but I know there's interest to have a student-led group. So for the person that's asking if you're interested in being part of one, I think there is, I don't know if the word is market, but there is like people out there who are looking. And I think the reason why maybe there isn't one is because it takes a lot of work to organize. And as a student, there's not a lot of time that you can give to organizing, except that there's like monetary incentive, right? So I'm able to be in my capacity with LeadMN because I'm getting paid for it. Because I don't know how it would be, right, if I didn't have that option. So there is interest, is what I'm trying to say. The people out there who are trying to organize and trying to come together, if that's something that you are interested, whoever is asking the question, I think looking your community and look around and ask questions and see who's there. But just be aware that it's a lot of work, and that's why a lot of people are having come together to do that in that capacity.
Yeah, and I'll also mention, if folks in the audience have any of these resources, we have the next question is also asking about resources. Please feel free to write it in the chat, and we can give a shout out, or maybe connect you to the people who are interested. Priscilla, would you like to ask the next question? It's in, I sent it to you in a private chat.
Okay, so, okay, I see it. So there's a practice of exploiting students and lack of resources in the housing rental area. Are there lawyers or higher institution committees to make sure students have safe housing, are being overcharged, ensure students receive their security deposit if there's minimal damage? Valid question. Anybody want to take a stab at that? Is anyone here from the U of M? I think this is like their bucket. No?
Hi, this is Anne. So Katie and I are both at the U of M. I don't know if anybody else is, but there's been, I think there's not much, right? And as you alluded to earlier, Priscilla, this takes a lot for students. So I think immediately when campus shut down last spring, there was like a legal clinic that was coming out of the law school, but I don't know that that was like a permanent thing, right? I think students are dealing with a lot of things, and especially now, and so I would just refer people, I guess, to I don't know what the name is, I'm sorry, but like the tenants union. I don't know what the name is in Minnesota.
Looks like this is Marcio. One of the participants dropped in the chat that there's a student legal services on many campuses, and that may be an avenue for students to use that service to get legal help with landlords and things of that nature.
All right. The next question we have, so another University of Minnesota call out, or shout out, I should say. The University of Minnesota Regents recently okayed free tuition for students of families who earn $50,000 or less. Very cool. What potential effects do you all think this will have on students that are or could possibly become food and housing insecure? Should legislation be passed for more colleges to do this? And the person who sent the question wanted us to know that they are 100% for free college.
This is Parisa from Hamline University again, and I really just want to address the belief that I have as well, that I think that education should be free for everyone. I think that capitalizing on education and access to that is something that is fundamentally wrong with our system. And I think that having this $50,000 or less, I think that is an absolutely great step in the right direction. But it also still doesn't really cover the people. It still doesn't really cover everyone. Even if your family is making over $50,000, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be paying for your tuition in general. Tuition, no matter what, will always fall back on the students. And I think that we also need to look at how much they're expecting to pay, how much they have the ability to, because that really is essentially the whole point, is that they need to be able to have control and autonomy and agency and know what is happening and what they can do to protect themselves and secure finances for college so that they won't be in debt.
I remember 2 years ago, oh, sorry, did I interrupt someone? I apologize.
Go ahead.
I remember 2 years ago, was it 2 years? I don't know, around the time we were electing our governor, that this was like sort of thrown around a lot, and there was a name for it. I don't remember what it is, but I know my organization was also pushing for it. And the number was like 125K if your family earned that or less, and then like the first 2 years of college would be free for you. And again, I don't remember what the name is. So there has been moved to have legislation like that. Unfortunately, not successful. And I think that's part of why we're having this call today, to just sort of educate the public on why this sort of things are important, because I don't think as a society we have moved that way, right? Not a lot of people are on board with the idea of free college, or even with the idea of giving free college to a certain number of students. So we just, if there's something that you're for and you're interested in, then you need to be educating more people to move them that way, because then that makes it easier for our elected officials to also move that way when they know that their constituents are all for it. So definitely agree that legislation should be passed for it. Legislation has been brought up to be passed for it. It just hasn't been successful. So, we talk a lot about like, can we do this? Can we do this? Some of those things we are doing, but it's also dependent on who's in power or who has that power to make that change.
Yeah, thanks. This is Anne again. I agree with everything that Priscilla just said. And I also just want to point out that at $50,000, students are probably already receiving Pell and other types of grants. So what is this policy really doing? It doesn't include cost of living, which is what we're basically here talking about. And then, you know, there's this whole other issue that we can go into, you know, that again reflects on this racial capitalism and the fact that the university is a land grab institution, and Native students still don't go to college for free, yet we are the least likely to gain a college education. So there's some things that the Regents could do if they actually wanted to make a change in this area.
Thank you. To piggyback off of what Priscilla mentioned about legislation that's been introduced, the best thing that everyone can do right now is to talk to their representatives and make sure that they know that things like this are important to their constituents, so that when, you know, LeadMN or another student group puts something like that on the table, they are more excited about it, because that's what's going to reelect them. They want their constituents to speak up and want these sort of things. So that, I would suggest from my perspective, is the best thing right now for just an average Minnesotan to do. Let's see. So I think we have one more question. And okay. Some faculty have questioned why the school should be addressing food insecurity, which is something we have mentioned on, you know, in conversation today. How have you worked to increase awareness and desire for action among faculty and administrators?
This is Katie. I think my first question to that would be, why not? Why would we not be addressing food insecurity and see what the rationale is, and then start a conversation that way. But I'm going to defer to the students because y'all are experts here.
I'm not a student, but I'm going to say that since we started doing this work, I would say the biggest barrier we've encountered with faculty is that they don't know that this is the reality, right? They just, and I think this speaks also to sort of what Priscilla was saying earlier. I don't, when I have the conversation with my colleagues about the syllabus and the language that they use, I think they don't know often, and this is not an excuse, but I'm saying their first reaction is often like, I didn't realize this, right? I'm going to work to change it or do better. There are plenty who won't and don't, but many just don't even connect those dots. And in all of the efforts that we've done at Hamline around advocating, so much of it has been around awareness and outreach, and just delivering the knowledge to people. And when they learn what's happening, they want to support it. They want to invest in it. They are showing up. And so I've never had someone say this isn't important, this isn't our job. I do feel sometimes very frustrated that when people are wringing their hands around issues of retention, that this, to me, I just want to shout, like, this is the issue, right? If you want to keep students enrolled on our campus, address their basic needs. As soon as basic needs are addressed, everything is a lot easier.
Yeah, and I wanted to add to Susie's point that, yeah, once the instructors and faculty of the colleges realize that when we have no food insecurity, when we don't worry about, you know, where we're going to live or sleep, then we can focus on getting our education, and we can focus on finishing the assignments, then we can focus on, you know, those exams. But when we have all those other things kind of just pressing on us, it's not easy to put school first. And that's why a lot of people usually choose not to go to school, which is, I think, not the best idea. But if you have to weigh it, food over going to a class, you're gonna pick food, especially if you have kids or elderly living in your house.
I just want to say before we wrap up, one thing that I've noticed in trying to work with faculty or seen from other students in their work with faculty to get them to care about these issues or get in line with these issues, we have to remember the faculty members are first and foremost members of the public. And so they will act as members of the public in how they think about this issue. So however they think about food insecurity for the general public is going to reflect on how they see it for students as well, especially for students in the sense that they're like, well, the government should be able to fix this, right? It's not the college responsibility, because then that could mean that they have to take some responsibility, right, in fixing it. And so just first and foremost, they're members of the general public. So I start to see them from there. Another thing that, because the question asked, like, how have you worked to increase awareness, right? One thing I've done is consistently engaging with faculty members and not backing down. That is something that I would say, like, if this is something that you desire to work on and to get through and to like fix, you cannot back down. You cannot say, because this professor said something ignorant, right, about food insecurity, it hurt my feelings. Just see it as this is another ignorant member of the public and keep pushing on, right? You cannot just stop at one time, because people are resistant to change. People are resistant to how they feel. But we also have to learn to ask direct questions. And this is something that I really want to employ students who might be listening. Always ask direct questions, right? If a professor says to you, the campus shouldn't be dealing with food insecurity, ask them, why do you think that? Why do you think students should go hungry while taking your class? That's not an offensive question. That is a direct question to why they think that way. And if they're unable to defend that, then that gets them thinking, why am I unable to defend this position that I have? And continue to engage them in that conversation, and sharing stories goes a long way. So that's one thing that I've seen in talking about Z degrees in OERs and affordable textbook, and talking about food insecurity, and talking about housing, all those things, is just asking them directly, like, ask a person, what does it take away from you to care about this issue? You know, and it's just being direct and having a conversation. But if we back down and say, oh, that was really rude, they're not really going to get into their heads why this is important. So we have to continue to engage them in conversation. That's the only way that we can move forward. And also engaging administrators in the conversation, so they are engaging the faculty as well in conversation, and we can push it along. At least that's how I've seen in the context of two-year colleges. I don't know. I think it can work for everybody.
Thank you, Priscilla. By the way, my name is Nikki Oliver, she, her, hers pronoun, and I'm the manager of grants and government relations, and also a part of the PE team for the Office of Higher Education. And I just want to thank every one of our panelists, and thank Lane and Priscilla for being our host for this call. Some very important information was shared. I do want to reiterate that this call is recorded and will be posted for folks that didn't get to see it, or folks that want to come back and rewatch it. One thing, I know we're past time because it's being, I would like to give Gia an opportunity to talk about another resource that's available to colleges that is offered by the Department of Human Services, that I think is also a really important resource to acknowledge and announce on the call. And after that, you all will be free to go. And once again, I just want to thank you so much for the conversation. And also, I do want to reiterate, I know Lane said reach out to your political representatives, but also our agency. We're here to advocate for students as well. And we've been trying to do that as best we can. But knowing this information is really helpful for us when we go in to also talk to the legislature and develop proposals, and even our work that doesn't involve the legislature. It's really important and key for us to know, and we love to hear from you all on these issues. Gia, if you want to mention the DHS resource, that'd be great.
Are you talking about the thing that we were emailed about this morning?
Possibly.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm talking about Sorry, the college resource for SNAP ENT to colleges.
Okay, I will quickly mention SNAP ENT, but it's only available at a couple colleges, Nikki. So if your college is a SNAP ENT provider, which is employment and training, there's only a handful in the state, but they actually, if your college is a SNAP ENT provider, and off the top of my head, I wish I did. Off the top of my head, I do not know which colleges have that contract. I know Pine Tech is one, and there's a couple others, but your college actually receives funds to help you with additional, with getting things like equipment paid for your program. It has to be like a 2-year or less program. So typically community colleges are a really good fit to start a SNAP employment and training contract. And so if you do not know if your college has SNAP employment and training, honestly, I would ask your academic advisor. Otherwise, you can try and just find it on the DHS website, which is what I'm going to do really quickly right now.
Yeah, no, it's fine. We can follow up and share this information, but I know one of the questions was how do schools become eligible? I know the current application had closed and they selected already, but in I think the next 2 years they'll be doing a new one, and we can make sure this information is shared with you all and all the public, so you understand kind of that opportunity when it does arise, and for students to know also if their school is already an existing SNAP ENT provider.
We could do a whole call on SNAP and SNAP ENT. I feel like there's a lot that everyone should know about and get on the same page about, because yeah, this is a great resource. Schools are starting to get into it and become providers themselves, or they have close relationships with SNAP providers they can refer students to. So it would be cool to talk more about this.
Okay, thanks for the additional resource, Lane. We'll make sure that we put that on the list of upcoming calls. Nikki, did you have something else to offer? Or?
No, that was it. I just wanted to once again thank everyone and let everyone know that our agency is also a resource and an advocate for students in all areas. So thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Once again, thank you on behalf of the Office of Higher Education and the public engagement team. Thank everyone who was able to attend today. As Nikki said before, the recording will be available on our YouTube page, our YouTube site. And we look forward to having you guys back with us next month when we talk about another issue that we need to move forward in the conversation in the forefront of students in post-secondary education. So thank you all for coming. Goodbye.